Hey there and welcome back to Rimworld. My name is Pete and today we complete episode 50 of our Rimworld Ice Sheet Survival series. First of all, my apologies that you had to wait a while for this one, but as I mentioned in my last channel update video, I got my wisdom teeth removed a few days ago and I couldn't really talk for a while. Also, because it's episode 50, I didn't want to cut it short or leave you with mumbling and incomprehensible commentary. With that out of the way, let's get to it. In the last episode we collected materials for the spaceship and we went on a small expedition with Cobra and Giraffe who brought back a pile of advanced components. As a result, we now have almost all of the materials we need to construct the spaceship, save for a few of those components and a rather sizable amount of steel. Regarding the components, Cambia is already busy at the fabrication bench, while Antonio has made his way over to the steel vein we discovered in our plasteel mining operation. It is getting pretty cold though, so we won't be able to work too long. As our first event, we then have a crashed meteorite, and normally those are not overly exciting, but this one is different. It's a big lump of jade, one of the more valuable materials in the game, only topped by uranium, gold and plasteel. Admittedly, the meteorite landed pretty far away from the base, but it might still be worth to send a small mining squad over there. For now though, steel remains our priority, as we're looking to collect more than 1,000 units of it in this episode. Let's now jump over to Nathan at the farm, who is sowing out more rice plants. I have turned a few basins back on just to give him more farming opportunities, because he is getting very close to level 8 in the plant skill. Once he's there, we can plant and harvest our own herbal medicine, and considering how we're slowly transitioning into the final phase of the game, that might be very useful indeed. Cobra, meanwhile, is busy making more pemmican. No one wanted to buy any of our huskies last episode, and so it seems we're stuck with a rather large group for the time being, a group that consumes a lot of food. While all of this is going on, we also have a few of our colonists haul back some steel slag chunks from around the map. We can smelt those into 20 units of steel each, and as I mentioned, we will need a lot of that, so every small bit helps. I also had our huskies on steel hauling duty for a few hours just to get a few additional chunks, but due to the cold temperatures we can't keep them outside for too long. With this next advanced component here, we now have 39 of them in storage, and if my calculations are correct, that means we only need one more before we have enough. The Rimworld wiki says that a minimum of 42 are required to build the ship, but maybe those numbers are from an earlier version of the game. I came up with only 40. Of course, that minimum amount, whether it's 40 or 42, that is only enough for a spaceship that can carry only one single colonist, and I imagine we want a few more than that to escape the ice sheet. If we wanted to take any of our animals, that would require additional materials, but we'll see about that when we're ready. In the evening we can already see Giraffe at the smelter, while our other night owl Antonio returns to the dig site. At this point we have already increased our steel reserves by about 150 units in the span of roughly one day, and that's a solid pace that should get us to where we need to be in no time. Now, one question that popped up again and again in the last episode is where are we going to build the spaceship? Even in its smallest design, we still need a fairly large 10 by 11 block space for it, and that is why Cobra can now deconstruct the wind turbine. With all the chem fuel generators, we no longer need to rely on wind power to keep the base running. We produce more than enough rice and potatoes to make more fuel whenever we need it, and this spot right here is actually just big enough to fit the spaceship. And by removing the turbine, we even obtain some extra steel. In the meantime, Cambia has finished advanced component number 40, so he can stop making more for now. Instead, we'll have him on mining duty as well, but not that far away. I discovered another large steel vein a lot closer to the base, and that is where he and Antonio will now mine until it's depleted. That is also about all that happens on this day. The rest of the colony is busy carrying steel back to the base, and in the evening our supplies have exceeded 1,000 units, with over 600 still left to be hauled, and the vein not even depleted yet. At night then, it is finally time. With a clear space to build and most of the materials already in the base, we can start putting down the blueprints for the spaceship. The ship needs a reactor and at least 3 engines. It also requires a structural beam where we will eventually attach the cryptosleep caskets that house our colonists. We also need to construct the AI core and the sensor cluster, but those will follow at a later point. All of these things also need to be out in the open, so we need to remove all roofs that could block the ship when it launches. Once that is taken care of, we can start working on the structural beam. With a cost of 200 steel, 40 plus steel, 3 components and only 1 advanced component, this is one of the cheaper parts to build. The entire spaceship will increase our colony wealth by quite a bit, as the individual parts all have very high market values, but in the grand scheme of things, the increase is not so big that it would make raids or mechanoid attacks unmanageable. With the beam constructed, we can also continue mining. Antonio has just depleted the first vein, but luckily Cambia has found another one to the north of the base. I believe we have used this one before, but as long as it still holds some steel, it's a good target. Our reserves have now roughly doubled since the beginning of the episode, but we still need a bit more. Around noon then, Cobra's shooting frenzy expires, but to be honest, I'm quite happy that he did not have to make much use of it. The rest of the afternoon is spent with mining and hauling steel, nothing overly interesting, so let's skip ahead to the late evening, where Antonio also depletes the second steel vein. Our goal of acquiring over 1000 units of steel is now reached, and we even have some extra, so at this point I can officially announce that we have everything we need to construct the spaceship. Just at that point, Randy also sends another meteorite our way, and once again it's of considerable value. This time it consists entirely out of silver, and it's also not too far away from the base, so with everyone in a mining spirit anyway, we'll get working on that in just a moment. Before we do though, let's continue with the spaceship. The first of 3 engines is up next, and this is Cobra's task, who will now haul 260 steel, 140 plasteel, 70 uranium and 6 advanced components over to the building site. This is now where it pays off that we bought up all the uranium in some of the earlier episodes, otherwise getting the 210 units required for the engines would not be that easy. While Cobra is busy building, Nathan then finally reaches level 8 in the plant skill. That means he can now plant Healroot, a plant that, when harvested, yields herbal medicine. So let's turn the remaining hydroponics basins back on, we have enough power for that, and let's plant Healroot in all of them. Healroot takes slightly longer to grow than our potatoes, so it's by no means a fast-growing plant, and one plant also ever yields only 1 unit of medicine, but still producing our own is more than worth it. With Cobra already in bed, Cambia has taken over construction, and so in the afternoon our first ship engine is ready. By clicking on the launch report button we can also see what's still missing, and as you can see the list is rather long, so let's continue right away with engine number 2. Night then sets across the ice sheet with Cobra still building, and just a few hours after midnight we have a bulk goods trader arrive. Giraffe will take the call, but unfortunately there is not a lot we can do here. The trader sells a lot of animals but is not interested in any of ours, so the only thing we can sell is the panoxysilene as well as 3 psychoid leaves for a meager profit of just under 300 silver. On the bright side, something that I just noticed, our Arctic Fox Henry has finally finished his training and is now capable of hauling. That means our 4 husky haulers now get another companion, and with temperatures slowly increasing again, our animal task force should be able to bring in a solid amount of materials. In the early morning hours then, Cobra has built the second engine, and we can now start on the ship reactor. And this one is a bit different. Once it is constructed, we have to turn it on to start the power-up sequence, which lasts 15 days. Once those 15 days are over, the reactor is ready and the ship can be launched. However, during those 15 days, the power-up sequence will attract an increased number of hostiles, so the next few days will be interesting to say the least. Once it is constructed, the reactor also provides a steady 1000 watts of power for the base, no power-up needed. Admittedly though, with a chem fuel generator providing the exact same amount, using a ship reactor purely as a power source is probably a waste of valuable resources. Even before we finish building, we then have the first raid of the episode. Don't worry, this is in no way connected to the reactor, those raids only start once we initiate the power-up sequence. We now have several Mechanoids attacking the base, scattered across the map after landing in drop pods, and the distance between them should also make this an easily defendable raid. Instead of arriving all at once, they will come one after the other. The first 2 have already fallen victim to our traps, and the rest should not be a problem for our turrets and a handful of colonists. And indeed, here we are, that didn't take long. Our turret took some damage, but that should be quickly repaired. The afternoon then passes by without any further incidents, and in the evening the ship reactor is finally finished, and all that is left to do at this point is to initiate the startup sequence. We are now being warned that we will be assaulted with an intensity we have never seen before, so I hope our defenses are enough to deal with whatever Randy Random decides to throw at us for the next 15 days. At least for the moment, however, things remain calm. Giraffe disassembles the Mechanoids for materials, and while we do make contact with pirates, they are only traders. And they actually have a very interesting item for sale, namely the Archotech arm right here. That is a high-quality bionic body part that can be used to replace the arm of any colonist, and, if the operation is successful, will make that colonist a lot more agile and thus increase his or her productivity. And honestly, what would a good Rimworld playthrough be without at least attempting to turn someone into a cyborg? So of course we'll spend the cash and buy the arm. Unfortunately, it also doesn't take long until we're being attacked once again, this time by a group of 6 Mechanoids. Again though, that is nothing that we can't handle, but with the traps destroyed and all of them arriving simultaneously, we play it safe and get everyone in position. Nathan can already start chucking EMP grenades, and as we can see, those are immensely helpful. The bulk of the group is stunned before they can do any damage, and the fire from all sides takes them down very quickly. The only one remaining is a lone lancer in the corridor, but we can send our small firing squad a bit closer to get rid of that one as well. And so another raid is over, and we can begin salvaging the mechs for materials. With the morning rolling around, Antonio has also begun the construction of ship engine number 3, just so we have those ready once the reactor sequence finishes. We'll build the other ship parts a bit later down the line, just to avoid too big of a sudden spike in colony wealth, because I want to take at least a few days to see how dangerous the raids actually are. If they're anything like the previous 2, we can manage them easily and will continue building right away, but it's probably best to remain at least a bit cautious here. Because we are currently swimming in steel, I have also decided to replace the broken stone traps with steel versions, as those are far more lethal. For smaller groups of raiders and mechanoids, we will probably not use them, but for anything larger, the increased damage output might be worth it. With the additional steel coming in from the mechanoid corpses, we should have no problem keeping enough steel in storage to build the remaining ship parts afterwards. And the huskies will also soon start hauling steel slag chunks again, so we can smelt more if we don't have enough. Our next event is then just a harmless cargo drop worth 120 units of patch leather. Not really the most valuable drop, but I think at this point the huskies should be able to bring it back without suffering hypothermia, so we'll do that. Worst case scenario, we can sell the stuff for a small profit. Meanwhile, back in the base, Antonio has finished construction of the 3rd ship engine, so more than half of the ship is already done at this point. Just a few hours later, our defenses are also mostly up and running again, and what's more, our husky Gorg has just given birth. Unfortunately, you already know how this goes. There is simply no more room for additional huskies in our colony. Just in that moment, we also have another trade ship pass by. This time it's a pirate merchant, so let's see what they have for sale. Now, they have a few colonists here, but none of them are overly spectacular. We could also buy an Archotech eye, but it's a bit too expensive and cannot be used to replace perfectly healthy eyes, which all of our colonists still have, so we'll send this trader away without making any purchases. To increase our funds a bit, we can now send Camber and Antonio out to take care of the silver meteorite to the north of the base. A few hours of mining should be enough for this one. Back in the base, I have also decided that we are going to train the remaining 3 huskies as well. It seems like we're stuck with them for the time being, and while we might not finish training them in time before the ship launches, it gives our colonists something to do while we wait for the startup sequence to finish. And should we train them in time, they will support our hauling efforts, and that is never a bad thing. Shortly afterwards, then, we have another trader arrive. I am unsure at this point whether the startup sequence also increases these events, but we have had a lot of them pass by over the last few days. Once again though, this one does not offer anything of significant value, so instead we'll sell a few items starting with 30 components. We have so many of them that we can afford to sell a few, and together with an old Tuke and a few units of excess cam fuel, we can make a decent profit here. Up next then, it's time for another husky birth. This time it's Madeline's turn, but once again our priorities lie elsewhere, and so we're not going to increase our population any further. In the late afternoon, we are then presented with a prisoner rescue quest, but I don't think we'll be going after this one. 7 enemies is a considerable number, and I don't want to send any of our colonists on a rescue mission while we might have to defend our home base. Speaking of which, the next raid is also just around the corner, and once again we're dealing with the Mechanoids. This is one of the advantages of starting the reactor in the winter. The ice sheet is simply too cold for most human attackers, which makes raids slightly more predictable and avoids enemies who can set fire to your base or dig through walls. We only have 2 groups here, all of them are melee attackers, so this should not be a problem. Now, unfortunately, we still had some of our animals out on the ice sheet, and they returned just as the Mechanoids reached the base as well. Husky Ruby is quickly downed, and Arctic Fox Henry also falls victim to the robots. Now, both of them are still alive, but they are bleeding heavily, so we'll see if we can rescue them in time. Our traps, meanwhile, make quick work of the first group of attackers, so we have just enough time to rush out with Cambia and Giraffe to carry the 2 injured animals back into the base for further treatment. Of the remaining Scythers, only 1 makes it past the traps, so that should not be an issue. Sadly though, despite Giraffe's best efforts, Ruby does not make it through. The blood loss was just too much, and with that our quest to escape the ice sheet claims its first victim. Now at least the last enemy falls quickly, but that does not really make up for the loss of a faithful animal companion. With Henry, on the other hand, the injuries are luckily not too severe. He only lost an ear in the fight, all other injuries don't seem to be permanent, so he'll hopefully make it through. Over the course of the following night, Cobra gets most of the traps back up, while Giraffe uses the Mechanoid corpses to reclaim a few valuables. In the morning hours, the damages of the previous day are mostly repaired, and we once again have a trader pass by. This pirate merchant has a masterwork machine pistol for sale, and at this point we don't have to manage our finances too sparingly. Every advantage we can get on the battlefield is a welcome one, so let's purchase this weapon. I'm sure it will come in handy. We will then give it to Cobra in exchange for his assault rifle. This might make him a slightly worse long-range shooter, but significantly improves his ability to defend the base in close combat. Now, there is one more thing we need to do on this last day of winter. We didn't buy the Architect arm to have it sit around in the storage room, and to be honest, who would be a better candidate for an upgrade like this than our colony founder Cambia himself? So, time to send him over to the hospital. We'll put him in our masterwork bed and wait for Dr. Giraffe to commence the operation. In the meantime, we have some good news on the animal front. Henry has recovered from his injuries and is no longer incapable of walking, so I think he has the worst behind him. In the hospital, we'll ensure optimal conditions by turning light and heater on, and then, just as we're about to begin, a faulty conduit sets fire to one of our turrets. Antonio can quickly take care of the problem, and then it's finally time to install Cambia's new and improved arm. The surgery here has a chance to fail, but considering the quality of the hospital, the working conditions and Giraffe's skill, we should be fine. And indeed, here we are, no complications. Cambia's right arm has now been replaced with a bionic one, so once the anesthetic wears off, he will work quite a bit faster. In our farming area, we can now also collect the first packs of herbal medicine, and if things continue the way they have for the last few days, I think we'll need those sooner rather than later. For the moment though, we have successfully survived another winter, and I think that is a very good point to make the cut in today's episode. Spring is returning to the ice sheet and we are getting ready to leave, but we also still have a good portion of the reactor startup sequence to go through, so things are not going to slow down just yet. Now, if you enjoyed today's episode, then I would of course be happy if you could leave a thumbs up, and if you want to support me and my channel further, then feel free to subscribe if you haven't already, or check out and maybe pledge to the Pete Complete Patreon. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.